Michael's one of my oldest friends I think we first met in 1994, which is 20 years ago now. Can you believe it? And we just hit it off. And
I never really liked it.
No, I know. But we have to tell them the story. And while you were looking at some of my drawings yesterday during my presentation, for those of you who were here, it is mainly Michael that taught me everything that I know about geometry and about drawing the crop circles. And I'm sure for many other researchers, he has been a fount of knowledge and expertise, irreplaceable. I'm sure some of you would have read his books, The Bones of God, or Crop Circles, or 80-20, or Cornography, which was wonderful. And it is always a treat to hear him speak, so I'm going to shut up now and say, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Michael Glickman.
James Mason, the film star, was making a movie in Dublin, and there was a break between takes, and instead of sitting around, he thought, I'll go walk around the town. And as he walked, as he ambled, he was aware that someone was behind him, and every time he turned around, there was a little old lady pretending not to be there and looking the other way. And this went on for a while, but eventually he managed to trick her by standing round a corner, and he came eventually face to face with her. And he just looked at her, inquiring with his eyes, why was she following him? And she said to him, and unfortunately, I'm not going to do this in a Dublin accent because I've not got one. But she said to him, excuse me, sir, are you not James Mason in his later years? I tell this story because I feel I am Michael Glickman in his later years. And what has brought this very, very close to me is that in assembling this talk, I thought I would put together a few of my favorite things. I've had a long time around this lovely subject, and I thought I'd pick out some high spots and share them with you, as we say in the New Age. I want to share this with you. But in fact, within hours, it was very clear that there was far too much. There was far too much stuff. Far too many favorite things. And so I've just had to slash and burn. I felt like a man with a machete in a rainforest, trying to make some kind of path through this abundance. And so, inevitably, some of this has been written about, some of it has been lectured about, some of it has been in books. And it's a sort of random collection. But curiously, the theme that seemed to develop for me in advance of this talk was number 7. And the prevalence of 7, and the power of 7, and the significance of 7. And for those of you who were at the geometry workshop, I started to open up the idea of 7, and Karen continued to talk about the geometry of 7. And this, as I went through my thick pile of scrapbooks and slides and images and drawings, 7 kept popping up and punching me in the face. So I think with the benefit of hindsight, I don't think I'd have called it some of my favourite things, although it contains some of my favourite things. Could I have the first slide? Now, this is the way I used to live. Those are Steve's lovely photographs, and they're in chronological order. And every single season I would stick them on the wall. And there, above the photograph, is, or if not above the photograph, related to the photograph, is the A4 drawing which I would do, which I would assiduously do for every crop circle. I did this for years. I drew more formations than you have had hot dinners. I drew formations until my forehead would bleed. And I loved it. I loved it. And the reason I loved it is that you gain an intimacy with the formation. When you're drawing them and staring at photos, you really start to understand how pathways work, how blocks of standing wheat come together, how radiuses work. You come to understand that there are no circles, they're all oval. We can't discern it, but when you actually go in and measure them, there is always an ovality, which is another thing that needs to be borne in mind. One of the things that is mentioned too often is the phrase by assiduous, what they used to call believers, is, and this couldn't be man-made because, I can't bear that. It can't be man-made because, it can't be man-made because it's a miracle. Of course it's not man-made. Why do we keep saying this? One of the reasons it can't be man-made is they're never circular. Now, if you make a circle with a plank and a rope, it's going to be circular. If you're going to use a centre pole and walk around, it's going to be circular. But the real circles, of which there are something approaching 100% of formations, are oval. I digress. The picture wall. Now, what happened with this picture wall, living with it, which was an amazing transformative exercise, is that if you go in against that every few hours, you start to notice connections. Now, the thing was always set up in time order, but you would notice, hey, that relates to that. And I found that the picture wall was blinking triads at me. It was saying, there are groups here of triplets. And I'll come back to this in a minute. Next slide, please. Right, I'm now going to, this is Oliver's Castle, the formation which was videoed as a couple of teams of luminosities went over it, and the crop circle went down from a field of wheat into a formation which went out like a blossom in the field. And this, for me, was one of the turning points in my life. I was there on the following morning, which was very stormy, so stormy that the muddy ground sucked my shoes off. I mean, it was terrible. But the formation was beautiful, it was enigmatic, and above all, it was sixfold, obviously. There was then the scandal with the video, which taught us more about human beings than about the crop circles. When the video of the manufacture of it was first shown at the barge, then in its pure state, people wept. People broke down. I mean, it remains a beautiful video, but we all thought, I thought, this is what we wanted. This is what we wanted, a glimpse of how it's done, a glimpse of how, we don't know what these lights are doing, but they did a balletic passage over it, and the wheat simply obeyed and swept itself down. But immediately, and I don't want to dwell on this, but literally within 48 hours, people were saying, oh, I could do that on my video, I could make that. It was definitely a hoax. It reached a point at which the manufacturer of the video, John Whaley, simply ran away, disappeared, never been found. And a lot of well-known names have besmirched their record with that horrible, sociopathic period, which was a hint of what was to happen nowadays. But I looked at that and I thought, it's clearly a simple six-fold geometry, but there's something more happening here. Now, next slide. I surveyed this very carefully, and I thought, oh, there must be a hidden geometry. And this was 97, and by this stage, we were all still hypnotized by John Martineau's absolutely brilliant discovery of the power of the constraining five-fold pentagonal geometry under many formations. So I thought, I was living in California then. I thought after the season I'll go back and I'll find out its five-fold nature. It did not have a five-fold nature. And I had no idea what was going on. And I struggled and struggled and tore things up. Didn't work. But one clue, I had measured that very carefully in the days when I could measure things carefully. And what was very curious about it was that the path, and I'm repeating much of what I said, the geometry thing, but I hope you can forgive me for this. The 6 paths from A to B were exactly 4 feet wide. Now, that precision was of a sort that I'd never seen before or since. In all 6 paths, all the way along, they could have been squirted out of a machine, 4 foot wide. And the paths from B to C equally were 3 feet wide. Bing! And I thought, what is this about? Usually you get a certain tolerance. There was none. And this knocked on my head. The other thing of interest about it was that the lay, the video shows, well, when the video slowed down, it shows that A goes first and it then grows outwards. Now, on the ground, circle A was perfect, cut like a piece of pastry. Circles B were very good. Circle C was sort of rough. And the tiny little ones at the end were a mess. It was as though there was a thermostat saying we're getting cooler and cooler and cooler. But I thought, what is the meaning of 4 plus 3? I suddenly thought, they're shouting at me, 7, 7, 7. And I thought, no, there is no sevenfold geometry. Sevenfold is too difficult. One of the reasons for this is that you divide a circle of 360 into 5, well, bingo's 72, pop, very easy. You divide a circle of 360 to 7 and you get 51.24. 587 124587 124587 124587 to infinity. And interestingly, the only numbers that drop out of that sequence, 142857, are 369. They don't occur. And I mentioned this the other evening, 369, which of course was 369, the goose drank wine, the monkey took a trip on the streetcar line. The line broke, the monkey got choked, and they all lived together, or went to heaven in a little rowboat. Nobody knew it. I think I found one person who did. Does anybody know that? Yeah, thank you, thank you. So, sevenfold geometry is the problem. But I put sevenfold to this, and look how it clicks. The mother circle A is precisely positioned and constrained by the outer arm crossing to a millimeter. So this was, for me, devastating. And I immediately called, I was in California, I immediately called John Michel, one of the great masters, and I said, John, I found that Oliver's castle contains a hidden, constraining sevenfold geometry. What does 7 mean? And he said, 7 is spirit, revelation, what lies behind the veil, and the eternal feminine. And I thought, boy, that's a good list. I also thought, and this shows just how arrogant I was at that time, that this signals the arrival of a real manifest sevenfold series. And I predicted it in my column for SC. The kind of thing that I wouldn't have the arrogance to do again, I promise you. But I predicted the arrival of sevenfold in '98, and it happened. But I don't take any credit for that. Now, next slide. I'm now returning to the picture wall. What the picture wall told me was to group things together in threes. And one of the most notable sequences of threes was the formation with the small pentagram star in it. That thing there, that little blip, was a beehive about 3 foot tall, which was hollow. It was so strongly made that you could sit in the field and lean on it. But there was a sort of 18-inch hollow in it. You could lie down and put your head in it, look up at this dome, this igloo. It was astonishing. I've never seen anything like that before or since. But the most remarkable thing was this tiny and perfect star. Next slide. That is the tiny and perfect star. Next slide. This was the Pusey White Horse, which had 3 tiny and perfect stars. It also had a lovely ring of standing single stems. Next slide. There is the ring, and there are the stars, and there are a couple of earthlings. Next slide. And here is another remarkable thing of small stars. In this case, this triggered the whole 29 question because there were 6 stars of 5 points, but one of the points had been dislodged, leaving the magical 29, which was available in many other formations. Next slide. And there is the dislodged triangle, which is like a gate opening. Now, if you took the center of that and went through that gate, you lined up exactly where Silbury Hill on the other side of the slope kisses the road, or kisses ground level. So that was the direction as well. Next slide, please. And I feel now, and this confirms me as a woo-woo bliss bunny crystal fairy, don't laugh. I was told that I should position these on a map, this group of 3. So, there is the Silbury Hill one, there is the Horton one, there is the Pusey one. Now, I had 4 of these triangles, and I did them all, and they were all perfect isosceles triangles. And this was the first one, and I'm only going to deal with this one, the triangle pentagrams. That distance was 7.7 miles. And these 2 sides of the isosceles triangle, and an isosceles is a triangle with 2 equal sides, these 2 sides were 98.77% accurate, over 7.7 miles. Now, I have here the list and position of the 4 triangular groups. The shortest one was 4 miles. That had there's another one which had an accuracy of 99.2, 98.1. So not only are they capable of putting down remarkable artwork, but they're capable of positioning it at a land engineering scale and making geometry not on a field, but on a landscape. Next slide. The other thing I noticed was that these formations all complied to sevenfold geometry. This was the original one at Horton, and there is a seven-pointed star inside it, and the central circle is held and sized by the sevenfold star. Next slide. That formation, that bit, is sized exactly by a thin seven-pointed star. Do you see the green one has just been overlaid? It's not actually there in the formation. I hope you gather that. The green one is duplicate of the outside one. Okay, next slide. Here in the Pusey one, the ends of the moon are precisely located by the arms of a sevenfold star. Next slide, please. And here you can see this sevenfold star located in a red circle, which is embracing the outer pentagrams. So that there's an amazing richness of information and thought and attention and precision which goes into this stuff, which we don't see. These lines are not in the field. We have to tease them out. Next slide. Right, the other thing I want to talk about is this idea of scale. They understand scale. We look at that picture, and at a distance from a helicopter, we can see that it is the kind of image which we used to, made of larger and smaller dots. Next slide, please. That's what it looked like on the ground. Totally incomprehensible and passionate, like going up to a Van Gogh painting and looking at a 3-inch square of it. You wouldn't have any sense of what's going on. And the idea that a human being could make any sense with our eyes of what this means from 1,000 feet in the air is ludicrous. But when you fly over it, it's a clear photorealist image. Next slide. And here is this formation. And you look at this, we know it very well, it's the basket of Bishop's Cannings. And we look at that, we say it's a weave. Weave is very easy. Next slide. That is what that beautiful weave looked like on the ground. How could a person know that that kind of thing would translate to an aerial photograph into this perfectly woven fabric? It's an astonishment. Next slide. I want to talk briefly about the coincidence. Another one of my favorite things is the coincidence of time. I was very interested in this general type of agriglyph, the one based on the spine. I was also very interested in quintuplets, Celtic crosses, and the implicit squareness in them. This arrived. Again, Mr. Arrogant, I predicted squares for that summer. I swear I wish I hadn't. The day I arrived from California to stay at my cottage in Stanton, St. Bernard, there was this thing in the nearest field to my house. I mean, what can you do? So are they telepathic or am I crazy? Next slide. And here again, this formation arrived nearest to my house in Horton on the morning my colleague Patricia Murray arrived from California that year. And how do they know? Next slide. Here's the 7. This is the first 7-fold I saw. And I thought for a long time this was the largest laid area of crop in a single formation. It wasn't, but it was pretty bloody big. I mean, look at that. Next slide. And it was a fractal. And this fractal drawing was done by a guy called Dolf Bratt, a Dutchman who went home and died a couple of weeks later, fell off a balcony in Holland. So my advice to you is don't discover fractals before you're about to go on Dutch balconies. Next slide. Now, this, in fact, was the following year, another 7-fold. And this, in fact, is the largest area of laid crop in a single formation. The area of this, just because I want to record it, the Eastfield heptagon, which the previous one, was about 0.7 of an acre. This formation, the roundway splash, is about 1.5 acres. Now, in England, we measure things in acres and feet and inches, but I know that from our American friends, you measure things in football fields. And so could I have the next slide, please? There is a football field over that formation, which gives you an idea of how big it is. That's an American football field, which is 160 feet by 360 feet. So is that a big formation or what? Next slide, please. This is the longest formation we've ever had. This was at Gypsy Patch at Chilhampton, and this was 4,222 feet long. That is by far the longest we've ever had. Next slide. And here we have what was actually the first formation, which under Karen's tutelage was drawn the other night. A lovely, beautifully made formation in Danebury. Next slide, please. Which was a formation that was constrained by Euclid's second theorem involving the equilateral triangle. Next slide. And what happened? The broad outline of this formation, Torsgreen Copse, was the broad outline of the huge Eastfield fractal formation. And what happened here was exactly what happened with the 6-fold fractals of 97. That we got the Silbury Koch fractal in its pure form, and then a while later we got the Milk Hill fractal with an identical outline, but with a central decorative rosette in the middle. And here we have the same thing. The outline fundamentally was repeated, but a decorative central rosette was added. Obviously, both sevenfold geometry. Next slide. It's a diagram, means nothing. Another drawing, another wasted evening. Next slide. Now, this has been referred to by several people, and I saw this little formation and I thought, what gives this such poise? What gives this such grace and such calm? What is holding this together? Next slide. And that's what's holding it together. The distance between the outer orbit ring and there is equal to the distance between there and the inner circle. And if you construct 7 circles to be centered on the outer ring there, if you construct them so that they kiss on the way around, they touch the outer circle and they touch the inner circle precisely. Now, who does this? What is this? What is the nature of this loving, caring civilization? I mean, why do they not say, they don't notice, they don't care, just give them a little pattern. But when you dig under the surface, you find such commitment and attention and millennia of skill and knowledge. And yet what's wonderful is that, like good teachers, they leave the stage when you want more, so that you have to dig away to find what makes that little formation so poised and so delicate and so precise. And one of the leading spokesmen of our man-made denier friends said, we rubbished it because it was so childlike. Next slide. This is what they did to it. Now, I put this up because this is a historic moment. We have seen many, many formations trashed by farmers. And it's bitter, makes me weep. But at least you think, well, it's their land, and they're wrong, and they're boneheaded, and they're stupid, but at least you understand it. They're angry, you understand it. This is a historic moment. This is like tearing the mask away. The hoaxers have destroyed the crop circle now, and that is their spirit. Next slide, if there is one. Ah, yeah, in the same area, adjoining this very simple little formation came down a week or so later. Next slide. It conforms to a sevenfold star. the arm crossing, the outer arm crossing, sizes and locates that as well. This is what I've learned. I've been looking at this for many years, and you would have thought that after a quarter of a century, that old guy is getting jaded. And I tell you, I find it more and more astonishing and miraculous that I gain a deeper and deeper insight into the initiators of this. And I feel they are evolved to a point where ugliness is impossible. They cannot think an ugly thought. They cannot say an ugly thing. They cannot do ugliness on fields. And yet, the crop circle world is astonishingly and increasingly a microcosm of the big world. And the big world daily, weekly, becomes uglier and uglier and uglier. It is accepted now that our kids play games on game stations in which they kill people. The best movies, the most successful movies, are movies about killing people. Planet Earth is exiled from the Federation because we have so little respect for life. We've screwed our oceans and our rivers and our water systems, the air, the forests are disappearing. And we here are a microcosm. And just as the ugliness of the real world is reaching a peak, so I find the ugliness within the crop circle world has also reached a peak. I never thought I would find a time, for example, when, and I have to say this, when the crop circle connector was so corrupt that leading hoaxers were now virtual directors. I never thought I would reach a point at which hoaxers would destroy a beautiful crop circle. And here we are. And yet, in conclusion, I'm more optimistic than ever I was. The brighter the light, the blacker the shadow. And we have had a fantastic season. The formations have been lovely. There have been maybe fewer. They've been chopped out quicker, but they've been lovely. And those who say, oh, it's the end, it's coming to an end, are lunatics. Someone, somewhere, some civilization, some intelligence has been working this enterprise for over a quarter of a century, meticulously. They have intent, they have will, they have a plan, they have an agenda. And whoever thinks that a few irritable farmers and a few sociopathic hoaxers are going to destroy or slow this down? Are you kidding me? Next year, this conference will be bigger than ever, and the bus tour will have a choice of formations to visit. Thank you very much indeed.